Hi, everybody. We're going to get started here. And my name is Mayor Mo Franey. Glad you're all here today. Behind me is Chamber of Commerce Head of the Board, Katie Ducharme. Give a hand to her, one of our partners in putting this on. So Katie is going to be going to show a house for realty, so she's dressed like that, and I was in the hog hustle, so I'm dressed like this. So you're getting this multi-thing. And my instructions from our communication director today were, the mayor's welcome will be first up and very brief. So I said, okay, I can get that. Anyway, no, I actually just want to welcome everybody. I do want to introduce my colleagues who are all here, because obviously this is very important to the city of Dunedin and everything we do. So first I'm going to start with Vice Mayor Gao is back there. Jeff Gao. Commissioner Walker. There he is. Commissioner Tom DeGard. Commissioner Steve Sandbergen. Our city manager, Jennifer Bramley, and our deputy city manager, Jorge Quintas. Yeah. And again, I just want to welcome all of you for being here. Thanks for taking the time. Thank all the organizations for being here, and just reiterate the importance of this, creating sustainability, protecting our homes, protecting our coastline, being ready for these things. Is top priority in this city, and we all know why, because of what we experienced. I experienced it myself. I'm still not back in my house, getting close though. So this is a really big thing for Dunedin, and thanks for coming, thanks for taking the time, so we can try to all be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo, and thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Katie Ducharme. I'm the chair of the Chamber of Commerce. This is our third year partnering with the city of Dunedin on hurricane awareness. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to our vendors and to our Government Affairs Committee at the city, at the Chamber for helping putting this on today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Spencer Shaw with Pinellas County Emergency Management Association is going to be our first speaker today. Spencer Shaw is an emergency management coordinator with Pinellas County Emergency Management. During disasters for the last 8 years, he coordinates planning, information, response efforts in the county's Emergency Operations Center, and has responded to emergencies around the state of Florida, including through the landfall of Category 5 Hurricane Michael in 2018 and Category 4 Hurricane Ian in 2022. So you're going to learn some great information from him today. If I could please introduce Spencer Shaw. I was wondering where you were coming from. Thank you for being here.
All right, good morning, everyone. So, last year, I was here, and we talked about Adalia, and we thought that was pretty bad. That wasn't great for a lot of folks in Pinellas County. This year, we know it can be worse, and unfortunately for a lot more folks, it was worse, and unfortunately we lost some folks in Pinellas County as well. So we'll talk about this year, what we can do to be better prepared, how we need to do things moving forward, and what our risks are. So, just some quick facts about the storms last year. So we started with Debbie. Hurricane Debbie came up from the Caribbean there, moved north, didn't really impact us a lot wind-wise, but it produced up to 10 inches of rain in Pinellas County, and that flooded some areas. It also eroded a lot of the shoreline, which dovetails into the next storm. Helene. Helene was big and bad, didn't make landfall, but just like Adalia, it pushed up so much water that it created up to 6.67 feet of storm surge. That's not that high compared to Katrina's 28 to 30, but that was something we've never experienced before. So even if you were here for 1985's Elena or the 1993 no-name storm, 6.67 feet broke all the records for Pinellas County. Then, right as we were just starting to recover from Helene, Milton came. And I remember sitting in the Emergency Operations Center. We were already there for a couple weeks from Debbie and Helene, and just seeing that forecast come out from the National Hurricane Center of a major hurricane right after Helene, going to make a landfall in Tampa Bay, it just broke my heart, knowing we were really hurt, my home, everyone's home, especially on the Barrier Islands and our coastal communities. Then Milton came. Fortunately, it moved just south, about 28 miles to our south as a Category 3. And unfortunately, it produced a lot stronger winds. So 101 miles per hour in St. Petersburg, highest gusts we've ever had in Pinellas County. So broke a lot of records, not great records we wanted to break. So preparing for this year, we're again reiterating ready, set, protect. So that's kind of the 3 phases. If we can get ready beforehand, when a storm is coming, get set, and then get ready to protect when we need to. So most of us know by now that the risks from a storm are dangerous winds, life-threatening storm surge, tornadoes, flooding rains, and then the surf and waves. You wouldn't think you would go out into the surf during a hurricane, but some people do, and that is very dangerous. And again, just like we talked about last year, the impacts extend well beyond the center, not just where that little line goes up the cone. We were out of the cone for Helene and Debbie, but we had a lot of impacts here. Milton, once it was moving to the south, we were outside of the cone as well, but we saw extremely powerful impacts. So the cone, again, does not refer to where the impacts are, it's just where that center is going. So that eye of the storm, that's what it's talking about. So even though if you see a forecast cone anywhere near Florida, start paying attention. It's something to be aware of. They are hundreds of miles wide. You can see Debbie on the left-hand side there was about an average storm. Helene was massive. It was up to 450 miles wide at one point when it was coming up north into the Florida Big Bend area, which they've also had a very hard time these last couple of years. I think it's like 5 hurricanes they've had in 2 years, something like that. And then Milton, again, very large as it started to expand, moving towards Florida. So another thing that a lot of people don't really take that seriously is the tornado threat. And for the most part, a lot of tropical cyclones don't produce that strong of tornadoes. Milton was different, so we did not have any tornadoes in Pinellas County from Milton. We had one from Debbie, and we had none from Helene. Helene did not produce a lot of tornadoes in Florida. Debbie produced some. Milton produced a lot, and they were very strong, up to EF3, which if you're familiar with the enhanced Fujita scale, a 3 is nothing to joke about. And EF0 is 70-ish, 80-ish miles per hour. 3, you're getting into close to 200. So very powerful tornadoes, and you can see the tracks up there. They were very long-lived tornadoes as well. So again, even if a storm is not making landfall, those outer bands, that peripheral impact can produce very devastating impacts. So it's very important that we prepare. If a tornado watch is issued, a flood watch, hurricane watch, anything like that, that means conditions are favorable for things to get bad. So when you see those watches go out through Alert Pinellas, Ready Pinellas, whatever media channel you're watching, social media, anything like that, that means pay attention. So, know your evacuation zone. I think after Helene, a lot of people looked up their evacuation zone. They may not have before, but Helene was a level A evacuation. It goes A, B, C, D, E, and then non-evacuation. So Helene was not by any means the worst case of what we can see in Pinellas County. Dunedin has zone A through non-evacuation zones, so it does vary based on the height of your community, where your home is, and some other things like that. Even if you're on a mountain peak per se, if you're isolated and you can't get help, that doesn't help you. So look up your evacuation zone, make sure you know what that is, and if you're in a mobile home, you always have to evacuate. A lot of folks did not. They had, one reason or another for not evacuating. I've been through such and such. I went through 2004 and nothing happened. Again, especially with Milton and those stronger winds, mobile homes, a lot of them were devastated, and Helene with the storm surge, very new constructed homes were devastated. Mobile homes really didn't stand a chance. Know your home's structure and wind loads. So get an idea of what those are. And the risk from freshwater flooding. Milton produced upwards of 20 inches of rain. And again, that is not that high on the record-breaking scale. Harvey in 2017 in Texas, 60 inches. That's very rare, but it's, again, something you need to think about. Where it can rain, it can flood. There are risks to freshwater flooding. There is a lot of convoluted things with insurance when it comes to flooding and when contents get wet. So all of that being said, have a kit, have a plan, and review it regularly. So plan not only for yourself, but for your family, also your pets. Never leave a pet. Most of us are pet lovers, so please never leave a pet. Make sure your neighbors are taking their pets if they're leaving. And those with access and functional needs. So we have the Special Needs Evacuation Transportation Assistance Program. You can call our office, or during an emergency, if you haven't pre-registered, you can call the County Information Center. And you could register to get the fire departments to help transport you to a special needs shelter or a hospital if necessary. A lot of folks in Helene said no. It was very disheartening that the evacuation was ordered, and unfortunately we had to do it a lot recently, but this time it was the real deal. And a lot of special needs folks did not evacuate, and they found themselves in floodwaters, and I don't know if they were on the registry or not, but most of the folks that died in Helene were elderly. It's not a fun way to go, especially there was, I believe, her home caught on fire, it was full of floodwater. It's very terrible. It's not something you want to go through, and I think a lot of people that did flood in Helene, that went through that, sitting on their countertops with their animals, would say, I never want to do that again. So, understanding the storm surge, I think, again, a lot of us understand it now, but that's the push of water from a massive storm, pushing water up from the Gulf or the Atlantic or wherever. That's that push of water from the wind. The bigger the storm, more than likely, the more storm surge there's going to be. Helene was 6.67 feet. That's that very first level there. When we're talking about 26 feet plus, that's Katrina level devastation. It's not going to take days to restore the power. It's going to be weeks to months. It's going to be, utilities are just devastated. So again, understanding what that risk is. For Milton, we call the sea level evacuation because we were looking upwards of 15 feet. Because Milton went to our south and that counterclockwise push of water was not present for that, we saw that negative surge, just like we saw in Irma, which I will say, please do not go walk out in the Tampa Bay on the dry land. It comes back real quick. So, when a storm is coming, when those watches are issued, when warnings are issued, the cone is near Florida. Just, again, prepare on that. If a cone is near Florida. If the watches are up, they'll transition to warnings if it's definitely the real deal. Know if you need to evacuate, when you need to evacuate by. The evacuation order is usually 24 to 48 hours before the onset of high winds. So that's kind of our gauge of when to issue it. We try and issue it a little bit more in advance. So it's not, as soon as that evacuation order, you don't have to rush and run out. Just make sure you have a plan of when you need to get out for where you're going to by the time the impacts start. How to protect your home, even if you're not evacuating. You need to protect your home, how to protect your family and your pets, and how long it will take you to get set. Some people, it will take them an hour. My house, I have a lot of windows. I have a lot of boards I have to put up. They're storm impact windows, but I don't like to replace windows, so I'd rather protect them. So there's a lot of things that can vary on how long it takes you to get set. Try and figure that out. Kind of use last year as an example. Make sure you stay informed. So there's a lot of information out there. It can be a lot to go through. We try and narrow it down to be somewhere in the middle through Alert Pinellas, Ready Pinellas. Make sure you follow the City of Dunedin on social media. Sign up for their alerts. They have the ability through Alert Pinellas to message you as well. So it's not just Pinellas County. The city of Dunedin can use Alert Pinellas as well to message you specific things. Disaster.pinellas.gov is the official county website for disasters. So check that. That's where you can find your evacuation level, call the citizens, or county information center rather, get all the latest information. Keep the wireless emergency alerts, or WIAs, on your phone. That's those Amber Alert type messages. A lot of people turn them off, and I got a lot of nasty emails before Helene saying, stop sending those stupid Amber Alerts. Nothing's gonna happen. I'm turning them off. None of those people emailed back and said, never mind, I'm turning it back on. But I assume they probably did. We, again, try not to blow up phones because we know it's annoying. It happens throughout the county, but those are those life safety alerts. Tornado warnings, Amber Alerts, all those good things come through the wireless emergency alert system. Trusted media sources, by now, probably have a great idea of where you can get your best information, who your favorite meteorologist is that gives you the best, cut and dry information. If you don't have one, National Hurricane Center is a great place to start. And then you can find your own flavor, but be careful of social media. Ever since, I think it was Hurricane Sandy in 2012. In Hurricane Sandy in 2012, there were images of sharks swimming in like the subways, the New York Stock Exchange, all those things. Just photoshopped images of sharks. Ever since then, every hurricane, without a doubt, hundreds of thousands of likes and shares on pictures of sharks swimming down I-4, swimming in Texas, swimming in places sharks don't usually swim. The same sharks, the same orientation, the same two pair kind of swimming together, without a doubt. So just be careful of what you're sharing, what you're posting. Try and vet it. I know that's not a fun thing to do, but just double check things. There's a lot of information out there. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. And then model watching. So a lot of people during Helene gave me nasty emails about the models say it's not coming here, you don't need to worry about it. Just because the models say it's going up to the Big Bend does not mean the impacts are not coming here. So just again, keep those in mind. And if you ever have a question, call the County Information Center. That's usually 24/7. If you're sitting in bed at 3 a.m. saying, I wonder, what about this? Call the County Information Center. Don't tell them I said that, but they would love to answer your questions about anything you could think of. So whether you're evacuated or sheltering, have a kit of either you need to go or you need to stay. Know where you're going to evacuate to. Try and get that pre-plan going. Whether it's friends, family, coworkers, faith congregations, things like that. Try and go with someone that you know. That's usually the best and most comfortable option. I know in 2004, that was a big thing, was the hurricane parties. All my family would come over to my parents' house and we would hunker down there. Ever since then, it's been kind of, switching the house since there's been so many storms, but try and go with family, friends, things like that. Hotels and motels are great. A lot of the hotels and motels in Pinellas County are on the beach, so not the best place, but if you are going to go to Orlando per se, try and figure out which one you're going to go to ahead of time. But again, just know, just like we found out in Hurricane Charlie in 2004, just because you go to Orlando does not mean nothing will happen. So keep that in mind. Public shelters as a last resort. So public shelters are an option. Both special needs and public shelters, or the other general population shelters, if you have nowhere else to go there. So they're not the most comfortable. They don't have gourmet steak and lobster, but they are a safe place. You'll be safe there. There's law enforcement, EMS, fire, county personnel, Red Cross, all those good things there. If you can evacuate tens of miles and not go up to Georgia or Michigan or whatever, tens of miles, not hundreds of miles, just makes it easier. And then if you do stay home, secure your home, boat, vehicles, things like that. A lot of people left their vehicles and they either caught on fire if they were electric or got totaled because they were electric or other vehicles. So just have a plan for those, where you need to take them, what you need to do. When time has run out, if you did nothing, it happens. We don't like it to happen, but a lot of people wait. If you waited and things become unsafe, do what you can to protect yourself, your family, and your pets. So if you have to go up to a higher level, if you have to figure out some things last minute, just keep that in mind, that even if you don't prepare, have at least a plan Z of, I didn't prepare A through Y, but at least have Z. Go to a safe interior location, especially during the peak time of winds. So a lot of storms in the past have been freshwater, and that's usually the case, or not freshwater, but water in general, freshwater and saltwater. Helene was interesting in that there were more wind deaths in the United States than there were flooding. A lot of folks didn't go to an interior room like a tornado warning kind of thing, and a lot of people found themselves in a really tough spot. So have your tornado room. Mine is my laundry room, because if anything hits, I kind of have the washing machine and dryer to protect that. It's in the interior. That's my plan. Don't go outside even after the storm passes right after or it looks clear. And then call 911 for life-critical things only. A lot of people called 911 during Helene. They had, I think, for at least several hours, 500 to 600 calls an hour. That is like several thousand% above the normal. Usually it's never near that high. So if we can try not to call 911 for non-emergency things, that would be great. Not only during a hurricane, but anytime. But a lot of people called 911 for information, what their evacuation zone were, things like that. That's what the County Information Center is for those non-emergency things. So during the storm, and especially the after effect, expect things are going to be disrupted for a little bit. I think we all realized that after the storm, or storms last year, but it can be worse. Again, it can be weeks to months without power, sewer, water, things like that. We were very fortunate in that we had a lot of resources come very quickly. In 2017, when Harvey hit and then Irma came right after, different parts of the United States were impacted, so the power companies, utility companies, all those entities were kind of split. So Irma, it was about 2 weeks. Some people didn't have power. It can be longer than that, so just have that in mind. Even if you're in a high-rise, a lot of folks on the Barrier Islands are in high-rises and said, well, it's not gonna get up to the 8th floor, I'm fine. All the elevator systems went out, the AC went out, and a lot of folks, elderly, young children, things like that, that are very sensitive to heat, had a lot of issues. We had to do stair lifts of hundreds of people out of condos and things like that because they thought, meh, it's not gonna, the water's not gonna reach the 8th floor, I'm fine. That's not the case. If you're in that evacuation zone, you're in the life-threatening storm surge area, evacuate even if you're high up. And then emergency crews are not gonna be able to get to you immediately. So our fire rescue, law enforcement, EMS, Sunstar folks do everything they can. This last picture here, they were fighting structure fires, hundreds of structure fires during the middle of the storm. They were trying to do everything they could to save as many lives as possible. Braving floodwaters, doing all those things. If you can take yourself out being one of those water rescues, one of those structure fires, to help them cut down on the hundreds of 911 calls they're getting every hour, try and do that. If you do find yourself in a situation, just know it may take a little bit. We'll get every resource we can, but it does take some time. And then after the storm, debris, mold, some floodwaters, especially if there was a lot of heavy rain, damaged infrastructure, all that stuff. So expect that. Try not to travel around if you can. So a lot of people after Milton was about 80% of the county was without power. Irma was 70-ish%. So Milton was our peak of power outages in Pinellas County. A lot of people immediately went on the roads. Don't do that. Try and stay off the roads if you can. Take a vacation day, whatever you need to do to tell yourself, I don't need to drive around right now. And then as things reopen, as we distribute supplies, things like that, we'll message that through Alert Pinellas, Ready Pinellas, the website, all of those information sources. So again, this year, if you didn't do this last year, make sure you're ready, get set, and then when a storm is coming, protect yourself and your family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Spencer. We really appreciate those insights. Ready, set, protect. My name is Sue Burness. I'm the Director of Communications here at the City of Dunedin. And again, I also welcome you all here to our expo. And yes, it was me that told the mayor to be very brief, and I think she was on point perfectly. So thank you, Mayor. Our next speaker is Mike Bolin. I think many of you may know Mike's weather page. He's a lifelong weather enthusiast with nearly 2 million followers on social media. He is a native of Pinellas County. He grew up in Tarpon Springs and currently lives in Oldsmar. He launched Mike's weather page in 2004 and has since become a reliable source of weather information, especially during hurricane season. Mike's weather page has been acknowledged by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the National Weather Service, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It has served as a source for reliable weather analysis by hurricane hunters, meteorologists, state emergency management entities, the Weather Channel, and government officials. So it's my pleasure to welcome Mike to the City of Dunedin's Hurricane Expo. It's his second year here, and we appreciate everything you do as well.
Test, test, test. Looks good. Hopefully this works. That was a great intro. Thank you. Myself, my wife.
Hold it down here. Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
All right, so I'm using a microphone. All right, so that was a great introduction. I was here last year, so if you were here, welcome back again. If you're new, awesome. I got a little presentation about hurricanes, who I am, what I've learned over the years, how our area is affected, a little bit of the sciencey stuff. So I think it's kind of cool to understand what makes storm surge, what makes our area, and some storm chasing videos along the way that I've found myself going into the storms the last few years and learn a lot. We will start with a little bit about who this guy is. So I always get the question. Let's just do this one. All right. I always get the question, how did I get to where I'm at? I started tracking weather in 2004. Never dreamed in a million years I'd be running a weather website that so many people rely on. Went to school at USF for marketing. And basically just became a weather enthusiast and turned my hobby into a passion and kind of a career, believe it or not. 21 years now doing this. 2004 is when my passion began, living here in Florida. And since then, met a lot of great people on the way. I got friends with Jim Cantori. The Red Cross came to our house. My family's a big supporter of it. Little Sarah there goes. We do Great American Teach-Ins, and really feel blessed to be where I'm at. Talking about the weather, recently I've been teamed up with Florida Division of Emergency Management, so you might see a lot of videos with me and Kevin Guthrie. So we try to bring the information to the state a little bit more, and I'm very thankful for that, and especially with our area being so active with storms the last few years. It's really been an honor to work with the state of Florida and present messaging to you. It was pretty cool last year at 7 o'clock, even though we had Milton here. It was pretty exciting to be on Fox and CNN on the 7 o'clock hour. So I felt like I was right down the middle. I didn't have to hear anything. We covered both bases during that storm, and it was pretty cool that they reached out to me here. All right, so let's talk about hurricanes, where we live. I got something highlighted in red here. It says that's what you get for living here in Florida. So one of the things that frustrated me last year, I started picking up on my websites, was, we got hit so hard with our hurricanes. Out of the state, people are like, oh, that's what you get for living there. That's what you get for living there. And that really irked me, because if you look at this chart, it doesn't matter where you live. Hurricanes have reached everywhere from Texas to Maine. It's crazy. So there's no safe spot from hurricanes. And what we saw last year with Helene, it extends well inland. And, we have natural disasters all across the country. You got earthquakes, volcanoes, mudslides, blizzards. It doesn't matter where you live, tornadoes. So I get a little irked about that. Living in Florida has its price, but so does everywhere else in the country. So the one good thing about hurricanes is we know they're coming, okay? Most of these other tornadoes and natural disasters, at least with these storms, we have a lot of time to prepare, and these type of expos are very important for that. I always put this Category 6 on there. It seems like every year. Hasn't started this year yet, but you'll hear about it. They always want to hype up like we're going to see a Category 6, and we don't have a Category 6. So Category 5s are rare enough, but there's no Category 6. Science-y stuff I put on the bottom. If any kids here, not a lot of kids, but there's something called the Coriolis effect. If you wonder why all the storms turn, it's pretty fascinating. I know some of y'all like science-y stuff. All the hurricanes want to eventually go back to the northeast because of the curvature of the earth. So if you're into that kind of stuff, it's pretty cool. Milton last year, I always remind people, Milton actually started over in the Pacific. You hear a lot of stuff about the main development region, like the Atlantic. Living here where we are, we really don't care what's going on in the Atlantic. We care about the Gulf, the Caribbean, and believe it or not, Milton came across the Pacific. So our little area here, I'm going to show you, we really don't care what happens in the middle Atlantic as much as we do what's happening right here in our own backyard in the Gulf and down in that Western Caribbean. Tropical peak activity. This is always this real easy information, but a lot of folks really don't know it. But we have a season that begins June the 1st. But we've had a lot of systems in May, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 23, we had a system in May. So just because we get a system in May doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean we're going to have a busy season or not. I always worry about the media hype. If we get a system in May, everybody gets panicky, like, oh my God, we're going to have the most active season ever. But it happens in May. Old cold fronts end up stalling out. Our peak season's August, September, and October. I highlighted September because we get both sides of the state. We get storms from the Atlantic, we get storms coming up around. But October, for us, we get these, the arrow that I have pointed there, we get systems that come up and they get curved up into the west side of the state, and that's kind of where we obviously get the most impact. So just because September is the peak season, our season sometimes gets going later in the year. And historically, late September, October is our worst time here living in the west coast of Florida, because systems start and then they end up turning because of cold fronts, and I'll show you why here in a sec. Names are always kind of cool. Every 6 years, the names rotate. The big question every year is like, oh, what are the names? Well, the names are out there. You might notice some of these names from years past. This is Andrea, Barry, Chantel, Dexter. Everybody likes to know the names coming up. We got a Karen this year, which is always fun to talk about online. Unless you're Karen, you get a little offended, I'm sure. Sometimes names get retired. I underlined Milton last year. That replaced Michael from 6 years prior. And then Francine replaced Florence, if you lived in that area. Idalia replaced Irma. So Irma seems like kind of yesterday, right? But we're talking, 6, 7 years ago. And ever since Irma, it seems like our area has been really alert with storms. And then I always show Sarah last year with an H, because Sarah's with an H. And then don't mind the flying portalette. No, I don't know why. It was always a cool video. Just, I always tell we do Great American Teach-In, so I'm telling the kids, sometimes it'll rain without storm clouds, but it's really not rain. But the ice storm. So here's something fascinating. A lot of y'all don't realize, or I didn't realize, there's been 14 ice storms retired. So ice storms for us living here, right? Ian, Idalia, Irma. We had Ida go up to, just beside us, a couple years ago. So ice storms, I don't know the reason, but for some reason, 14 ice storms have been retired over the years. couple little notes here also show, which is the biggest question I get is, hey, Mike, how many storms we're going to have this year? People want to know how many named storms we're going to have. Well, 2023 was the fourth most active year ever, and we had 20 storms, but only one storm people remember, that was Idalia, because we had 19 fish storms, basically. Last year, we had less storms than 23, so, is it a slow season last year? When it comes down to it, did it really matter how many names we had? They were forecasting 25, 30 storms last season. It was on every headline. It was going to be the most hyperactive season. Well, technically, we only ended up with 18 storms. But they were impactful, and it didn't really matter, right? So we don't worry about how many named storms we're going to get. It's whether or not they impact us or not. And I'm going to show you what our prediction this year looks like. Unfortunately, we might be dealing with a busy year. Pinellas County did an awesome job. A lot of this stuff might be the same, maybe a little different spin on it. But I always talk about the main threats. Obviously, if you're fearful of hurricanes, there's a lot of fear out there. We talk about media hype as one of the main threats. A lot of folks come to my page because maybe my style, and I try not to hype, but media hype is real, so people get really scared about hurricanes. If you're worried about dying, it's probably water related, okay? Almost 90% of all hurricane deaths are water related. So if you're in a zone, an evacuation zone, first off, I've joked I've become a Debbie Downer over the years. I'd be the guy that says, don't worry about evacuating. I'm the one out now like screaming out there, if you're told to evacuate, evacuate. I'm friends with Kathy Perkins, Pinellas County EOC is awesome. They put a lot of time and effort into making that call. And they did an amazing job with Helene, obviously. A lot of folks didn't believe it, but it unfortunately ended up to be true. So water deaths are real. If you're told to evacuate, get the heck out of Dodge. I mean, I tell my family the same thing. And I don't think that, you heard maybe at this expo, but it's evacuate tens of miles now. It's not hundreds of miles. Irma, everybody left the state or went inland and the storm followed them. So really it's just evacuating out of those, danger zones, 10, 15 miles, go inland, and if nothing happens, but be glad you did. All right, power outages. I have Irma's power outage map on the bottom left. It just kind of shows you how we had power outages all the way up through Atlanta. So the storm doesn't stop at landfall. And then inland flooding. We're going to talk a little bit about inland flooding is just as bad as storm surge flooding. I do have some videos in here. Well, this one's not a responsible one either, but I've never been responsible. Standing in Ian here was what I was attempting to do, but there was a garbage pail there kind of blocking me. But anyway, storm surge. We're going to talk a lot about storm surge. Storm surge is fascinating, okay? Storm surge is very hard to predict. Storm surge is changing every year as far as how they try to message it and forecast it. Category strength doesn't mean anything, and that's the number one thing I think I try to let folks know is, we, as a media, they focus too much on category strength, in my opinion, and, if it's a 1, you're just like, it's a 1. Well, if you look at category strengths and storm surge, Hurricane Ike in Texas years ago, 20-foot storm surge. It had more storm surge than Michael. Everybody thinks Michael, Cat 5, but, category 2 storm. Helene was weakening on its path here, and we're going to talk a lot about Helene. So every storm is different. We don't focus on the category strength. Bigger storms push a lot more water. Charlie, everybody remembers Charlie. It was a category 4, and it only had 6 to 8 foot of surge. Ian, category 4, but it had double this surge. Bigger storm. Every storm's a little different. Living where we are, unfortunately, the Gulf is shallow, okay? That makes that water really pile up, and we saw that the last few years. Moon cycles have been really big for us, and there's been bigger swings in the tides. Any fishermen here, they'll tell you the king tides are bigger. It just seems like we're having bigger tide swings, magnifying our surge on the coast with what we get. So the moon cycles are included in storm surge, but the one thing that isn't ever included in storm surge is the waves, and that was something that really hit me a couple years ago. I didn't really realize, but and I got video of Helene's surge coming up and down. We've never really experienced surge with wind. Unfortunately, areas that do get a direct hit, when you add the wind to the surge, you just have another 10 feet sometimes of waves, and they're just pounding, and we did not get that with Helene. We just had a slow rise of water and fall without the wind. So waves are added to surge, and they don't tell you that part. When they say 10 foot, add 10 more feet to a wave that unfortunately places like Fort Myers saw during Ian. So here's where it gets tricky. Our little map here, you can kind of make out Dunedin and Cal-DC there. All that played true. Category 1, most of that area was covered up. These are called slosh maps. And I just put a picture of the marina there in the middle. I was surprised. I took a trip out there. The marina seawall's fallen down. I know there's a lot of boaters upset, but our seawall there is actually going in. So they're going to have to replace all that area. We know the dock was messed up there. So the coastal areas with a Cat 1, but the tricky thing is, a Cat 4, the top right. Now, we had this projection during Ian, and it didn't happen. And I'm going to show you another slide. But if we would have ever got a Cat 4, to our north, we would basically become an island. And I think after Helene, we've all realized that when these storm surges say 6 to 8 feet, it's going to happen. So I think the only good news is we've probably lost that stubbornness a lot of us have had and said that can't happen, because it can happen. And if we ever get a Cat 4, then we got some serious surge. And I put a little star. That's where I live, so we would not be there right now, for sure. So the messaging is tricky. Here's a tricky little forecast that I always show folks where I live. But if you've ever been on Line Ball, there's a water marker 2.5 miles from the bay. That's just like, there's my truck. It's unbelievable, right? Tampa Road, we had our bank in Oldsmar was underwater in 1921. So as bad as it was for Helene, it was nothing like it was in 21. And nothing like if we ever got hit again. So I think, the main messaging, I'm thinking, what do we tell people from here on out? Well, it's going to be comparing Helene as the worst case scenario, and that's really not. We could still have, I'm not being a Debbie Downer, but we could still have bigger impacts that we have to educate folks on that we haven't seen. Now, this is inland flooding. It was from a retention pond. It was not even the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America, excuse me. Gulf. Let's stay out of that one. But this is how we get inland flooding. We call that a Milton. It doesn't take Gulf water to bring water into your homes. And, you get this intense winds and push. This is what it looks like. And this is why we have a lot of inland flooding with Milton, which I think, we get to thinking it's only going to be a storm surge issue on the coast, but the inland flooding is something that we saw last year, a lot of us have never seen. And I got some videos on that. This isn't that long. I keep saying more videos, but it's not that long. Tropical systems spin, again, storm surge is our number one concern living here, and I think messaging is still got a long way to go, trying to explain how the storm surge works and if you're going to get influenced. So I put that little question, a storm goes to our north, what's it going to be like? And storm to our south. This is where Emily will run away. Emily, this is you. She hates this picture, but there's my little Emily when she was younger. We had Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Hermine, okay? This is when I first started realizing the effects of storm surge. So 2016, Hermine went to our north, and we had a lot of water in the bay. They cleared the dock. The storm hit the Panhandle area, not even close to us, and this pretty much told us our future with what we're going to be dealing with these storms that skirt by our side here. We fast forward a year, and I'm sure you all remember this year when the water came out, but it was all over the news. It was like, oh my God, the Tampa Bay is out of water. Like, where'd the water go? And I went out there like everybody else. And I always thought it would look like a bunch of the zombie movie. We're walking around, and I walked out almost a mile. The water was gone out of the bay. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Well, Irma was to our south, and it rotated, and all that water came out. So this is the same spot 1 year later, totally different effect. Storm to our north, storm to our south, and what it can really do with the waters. So let's go to Ian, all right? So Ian, a couple years ago, 2 days before, we had that worst case scenario for our area. We had Pinellas County becoming an island, and I don't think anybody took it serious. I don't think anybody realized that this really happened 2 days before. There was no panic. there was no urgency. I think we got hit so many times with these possibilities that we just all believed that can't happen. And Ian turned to our south, and we got nothing. And unfortunately, Fort Myers and all that area, Sanibel, got hit very hard, and that could have been us 2 days before. And again, it's the messaging. Irma was the same way. Irma was supposed to hit us. It turned. Charlie turned. The size of Charlie I have in the video with Ian. Ian was twice the size. A lot of folks down there were like, I made it through Charlie. I can make it through Ian. So again, every size storm's different, and it's all how you message these what-ifs. Now, I talked to a couple one night in Chili's that asked me, how'd you all do in a hurricane? And I remember asking them, and they're like, we lost everything. And I'm like, really? And they got flooded with Helene. They live in Oldsmar. And her mentality is what, it rang a bell. Because she said, well, we've been under surge warnings 3 times now. Like, we were supposed to get 6 to 10 with, Irma. We were supposed to get 6 to 8 with Ian. And we didn't get anything. So they just thought, well, it's the same. That's what they're projecting. So we're going to be okay. They didn't really understand those storms turned, but we were still under a storm surge warning, So they thought, we survived those 2 and it won't happen. So we just have to really educate everybody that, that sometimes this forecast is a bust, but we have to know that it can happen. We saw that with Helene. Those surge estimates, unfortunately, panned out. So looking back at Debbie, for me in the media, I always worry about the messaging on a system that's only a Category 1 or tropical storm. This is Debbie last year. I was filming in Live Oak. Swanee River filled up. The locals said they've never seen nothing like it, flooded their city. Every storm's different. Category 1 Debbie had $120 million in damages. It was only a Cat 1. So, again, it goes back to what I said earlier. I wish we wouldn't focus so much on category strength. The media will start hyping a storm downward. If a storm goes from a 3 to a 2 to a 1, you'll hear like, breaking news, it downgraded. But sometimes that's our biggest problem here, is not the category strength. And then I always say, by October, once college football comes around, everybody stops talking about the hurricane season. It's like the hype's over. That's when it needs to begin for us, especially September, October. Everybody has hurricane hangover by then, and really, we need to amp our coverage up a little bit. So we had a storm. This is what started it all in our area. I don't know what's going on. I've had friends in Indian Rocks Beach have been flooded 4 times since 2020, but this is a reality that we've been seeing. Tropical Storm Eta came by. And we really didn't get any flooding here too bad. Oldsmar did, but it was a storm that passed by 60 miles, and it flooded over 500 homes in Madeira Beach alone. And I remember walking up and, down these streets helping the sheriffs was out there with water rescues. Everybody went to bed thinking it was going to be nothing because it passed way to our, west. And we ended up with this massive flooding that nobody really expected. The Pinellas County, the road there along Safety Harbor was all, 5 feet underwater. So, and since then, we've had a lot of systems do this, as we know. Some video that I got from Ada down at Jones Pass kind of shows the surge. That's the first time I've ever seen what surge looks like. And again, if you've never really seen it, it's just crazy to see water come up. These are restaurants, waterfront dining takes on a new meaning. But that was crazy. Again, it was midnight. Nobody knew it was coming. And I think from then on out now, we're seeing these storms pop up out of nowhere. That was close to my house, the Safety Harbor, marina there. Some of y'all are familiar with. It was just weird. There's Jack Willie's, our little restaurant there in Oldsmar. Nobody had any idea. They were doing water rescues in Palm Harbor, Oldsmar. So a little storm there that nobody talked about, and started this whole trend. It seems like. So our area, this is a little slide I threw together showing you storms that passed to our north. Idalia, Ada, Hermine, and Debbie all flooded our area. And then Helene on the bottom hasn't been updated yet. But if you look at the storm tracks of where those 5 storms all went, it's crazy to see, right? They're not even a direct hit. So I'm starting to do a little more homework for our area, like where our worst case scenario is. And it seems like these storms that are heading towards the Big Bend are pushing that water into our Tampa Bay area. Debbie was a tropical storm, and it was, way out there in the Gulf, but the angle, when it came in, just pushed all that water in. We had all of our bridges were underwater. 20 inches of rain. But Tropical Storm Debbie, I'll never forget, Courtney Campbell was underwater, Howard Franklin was underwater, all from a tropical storm. So this, remember that we don't need a direct hit in our area to take things serious. And storms to our north, history now is when we really need to pay attention. Because the number one thing I heard, and I'm sure you all heard, is, it's not going to hit us. It's 100 miles off our coast. That can't happen. I think if anything from this slide today, we've learned firsthand it can happen. 23 December, nobody remembers this little storm, but we had a funny little storm that passed by our side here. Just kind of showing you the same scenario when we have a system pass off of it. Those are real pictures I took, water lines, and it was a no-name storm in December, and those a couple hundred homes again were flooded down in the Caribbean. So this is a new thing that's happening. These storms pass into our side and just kind of raise in the water. So I like to play this one since I do storm chasing. This is the Category 1 barrel. Some of y'all might not really follow any storm chasing videos, but this shows you what this Category 1 and this one actually had power outages all over the Maine. They had 254 tornado warnings. New York had a record. So the storm doesn't stop at landfall. This, like I said, there's our road that we came in on. That storm surge. We were trapped on this bridge for 9 hours. So I took some video. The homeless, all the locals are like, this is the worst Cat 1 we've ever seen. So take every storm serious. I think that's the point of this. It was only a Cat 1 and crazy amount of damage. All right, what else we got? Let's see. The cone. All right, so this is a little bit that Pinellas County touched on, but I think it's important to talk about the cone real quick. So we do have a new cone. Last year they introduced the one on the right. The old cone would just show basically the coastal areas. So at least now this year the National Hurricane Center has a new cone on the right, which shows you watches and inlands, or watches and warnings inland, which is so important, especially for all that focus on landfall. Sometimes the people in the inland areas are like, where did this come from? So anyway, that was a big change. Back in Hurricane Michael on the bottom left, that was what some of the channels were putting out, but then the NHC graphic was the one right next to it. And we had hurricane warnings all the way into Alabama and Georgia. So at least the NHC did that for this year, and hopefully make things a little more easy to understand. So a little bit about spaghetti models. I'm almost done. So Spaghetti Models is the name of my site. I don't know if y'all love spaghetti models as much as I do, but I love every one of those little noodles is like a brain, and some years some are smarter than others, but you can learn a lot. When you put all these people in a room and they all have their own opinion, you get an idea where everybody's kind of leaning, and that's kind of what spaghetti models are, and you can learn a lot. So like, let's look at Ian, for example. So on 9/19, that was almost, 10 days before it made landfall. It's an area of interest. They call it AOI, area of interest. Had to check my spelling there. And that's when we start tracking these things. So 9/21, 7 days before landfall, we started getting spaghetti models. And if you look at 9/21 Euro ensembles, you start seeing a little turn. You start seeing a little bit of a trend there. And you look at the GFS, and it was all over the place. So that's kind of things that I do every season. We start analyzing models and which ones are performing good. We throw out outliers. 9/22, holy cow, look at them. They're all pointing towards South Florida, But then if you look at the NHC cone on 9/25, it was showing the panhandle. So everybody that was on the outside of that edge on 9/25, just 3 days before landfall, probably thought they were safe, So that's scary, I think that teaches us that 2 to 3 days out, probably isn't going to go where it's supposed to go. I mean, we have spaghetti models for a reason, and they show you these outliers. So I really pay attention to 2 to 3 days out. Somebody in that cone is going to get probably an unexpected turn, which we saw with Ian. And it, 3 days out, man, everybody was, even here, people were telling me, it's going to the panhandle. I'm like, no, that's the worst case track. If this thing did that, we would have had tremendous damage here, as we saw with Helene. So we look at the spaghetti models, they swap around. It's just really important to know all scenarios and not focus on that cone. The cone is pretty much anywhere that storm can go with effects way outside. And that's so hard to get through everybody's skull, including mine. Because we all look at that cone, we all look at that center line, but we forget if that storm goes to the right, there's going to be a lot of folks outside that cone that get impacts. And that's kind of where the cone is confusing sometimes. Now here's Last one on this one just kind of shows you the history of the cone for Ian. And then, one time it was coming right to us again, but it shifted to our south. But what got tricky on the messaging for Ian was originally it was going to hit the Panhandle on a Friday as a weakening hurricane. And that was the talking point everybody was saying. It was like, oh, it's going to weaken. It's only going to be a hurricane. It's going to hit on Friday. Well, when it turned, it was 2 days earlier, and it was a major hurricane still. So the track was correct as far as intensity, but now it hit 2 days earlier as a Category 4. And there was a lot of folks not prepared, trust me. Evacuations were late. They didn't have time. So that's, again, you got to just look, you got to look at all these scenarios and think, oh man, if that thing turns, we don't have till Friday, we have till Wednesday. And it really messed a lot of things up for the folks in Lee County. Pinellas County talked good about this, but inland effects, we talk about it all the time. I think this doesn't get talked about enough. I got video from the Withlacoochee River on the top. That was a month after Milton. People were still not home yet. That was our flooding down by Drew Street. I don't know if you saw the news on that, but they had to do 100 water rescues right by that Best Buy the next morning after Milton. I interviewed some folks there that, they think the storm's passed. All of a sudden, they're escaping out their window to the second floor, grabbing whatever they can, because the water just starts accumulating and finds the lowest spot. So that's what we learned with Milton. Inland flooding is real. You don't know where it's going to happen, unfortunately. I don't think the water can keep up with the drainage sometimes, and it just falls. We had a lot of it in Oldsmar, too. So, and then, of course, the tornadoes were unbelievable. 130 tornado warnings inland from Milton. And then we got Helene, which we know too well. Helene, passed way to our west. Nobody could believe that center NHC line, that cone, would really do what it did to our area. If you just look at that, you're like, look at that. There's a big gap between that line and Tampa, right? I think everybody thought that, and boom. That's our city streets, which they obviously look like that here, unfortunately. If you're new to the area, that's just unfortunate scenes that we all know too well now are the piles of debris and the trucks that live in our neighborhoods now for months, picking up everybody's belongings, all from a storm that was so far away. Now, this video that I got here, this is from a WeatherStim camera in Oldsmar. This is the only one that I could find locally, but this Helene passed. Helene passed our area at nighttime. There's no surge yet. And then right before sunset, you can start to see that water come up. And granted, this water flooded about 1,000 homes in Oldsmar. It doesn't look like a lot, but it went up 4 feet. The blue light mystery was ended up being dock lights. I thought we were all theorized what the heck those little lights were, but they were lights on a nearby dock. But there's the water came up, and then before sunrise, look at that. It's like you couldn't even imagine what just happened, right? I mean, it's like anything ever happened. And Helene was just a slow rise of water and a slow fall. We didn't get the winds with Helene, and that's what scares me. We add the winds to that, we got even bigger problems. But yeah, everybody went to bed that night, thought it was over, and guess what?
I am El Nino. All the tropical storms must bow before El Nino. Yo soy El Nino. For those of you
A little bit. So in the news, if you live here your whole life, we talk about El Nino, La Nina, busy year, slow year, all that, So I threw that out the window. Where we live, it doesn't matter. Other areas, it does matter. 2004, so they measure a little area in the Pacific, and if that water is cooler than normal, we're in a La Nina pattern, which means we have less wind shear, bottom line. So favorable conditions on a La Nina year, more names. El Nino years, we're supposed to have less names because more wind shear, all this sciencey stuff. Well, 2004 was an El Nino year. 2018 was an El Nino year. Those are years that were supposed to be slow, but we had very memorable hurricanes that year. So the only reason I point this out is there's been active years in El Nino. There's been active years when we're not supposed to, and vice versa. So we don't, living in Florida, we really don't care. We can get storms either, El Nino, La Nina. But I do have this to show you, which is a little more homework I've been doing if you're a little sciencey. The pattern that we're in this year, we're going to get into this year's forecast, and it's over. I'm over. But the La Nina neutral pattern you might hear a lot about is what we're going to be entering this season. And what I've learned over the years is that when we have this La Nina pattern, we have a strong Bermuda high. And if you get any old, say old timers, I'm getting there too. My mom and dad grew up in the Eau Gallie area, Patrick Air Force Base, and he remembers Bermuda high. Everything was Bermuda high. Everything was controlled by that Bermuda high. When we have this weather pattern we're in now, this was last year, we have a lot of storms that go around that Bermuda high and end up more west into the Gulf and Caribbean. And that's what we saw last year. We see less fish storms because that Bermuda high is strong. Storms have a natural way to push west. And unfortunately, we kind of in that same pattern. There's all the storms from last year. You can see how it's kind of all pushed out. 2020, I always show, is another La Nina style year, and you can see we had a lot of storms pushing that direction. So we have these La Nina years. We do have more names, but what I think is more important is the steering patterns, and we just seem to have more storms that push off to the west, which means we have to be a little more cautious. As you've seen this year's forecast, which I'm going to show you here. Now, 23 was an El Nino year. This is supposed to be, not a lot of activity. And we didn't. 23 had 20 storms, but they were mainly fish storms. So again, we can have a lot of storms, but they don't impact anybody, right? That's a great year. But we still had Idalia. That could have been us. Idalia turned just a little to our north, but we still had impacts from Idalia. Idalia figured out a way. I circled that red area. That's the shear area. So during the year of El Nino, a lot of wind shear, no storms. And if you go to 18, the same type of a weather pattern that year with El Nino, no storms in the Caribbean. But we had Michael, almost exactly the same as Idalia, a lot more fish storms. So a little fascinating thing if you're into that. One is we should always be ready. But if you're into like the patterns and the steering conditions, I think we're going to see more storms push in our direction, unfortunately, this year. Now, it doesn't mean Florida. It could be upper Gulf. It could be East Coast, but just more of a push. Then I always say this, it only takes one. That's the theme I've been trying to push. We just be prepared. One storm will define your season. 83, there was only 4 storms that year, but they still had a major hurricane in Houston. And then I always show the bottom graphic for 04, which is crazy. There was one little spot in Florida that all 3 storms crossed. Somebody moved there thinking they were going to escape. They're like, I ain't going to live on the coast. And then 3 hurricanes come across their backyard that year. Crazy. Here's the forecast for this year. Colorado State University, everybody laughs when I say that. They're like, Colorado, what do they know? Well, they know not to be around hurricanes, but they're smart. All the smart guys are from Colorado. So anyway, they're predicting above average season. I believe it. I used to not believe in this, but now I believe it. I'm going to show you here. But anyway, little above average. You don't know where they're going to go, but it does make sense when they predict these predictions because of certain things like this here. Water anomalies, we track the water temperatures. Water temperatures are still above normal. That's number one. Water temps on our side are warm. They're cool in the Pacific, believe it or not. But the ocean heat content is what we look at. That is the water below the surface. That's been warm. They measure 30-year averages, and we happen to be in a warm cycle. If you want to do homework, AMO cycle is a 20 to 40-year Atlantic swing, and there's been years that we've been really low. So we're just happen to be in this pattern of really warm waters right now, and that's what it's looking like this year. We're going to be in that La Nina session, and long-range modeling all shows that we're going to be warm water, increased rains. So anyway, that's why I believe that we're going to be busy. Biggest stat for our area, and I think is the most craziest stat I've ever ran across, but there's been 150-mile-an-hour hurricanes that have hit the continental U.S. There's been 10 of them. What's fascinating, 9 of those were only tropical storms 2 to 3 days out. Like Ian was 70 miles an hour on a Monday, and it hit 155 on Wednesday. So we got that explosive water in the Gulf, and storms just pop up. That's why it makes things important. I think what I do is we look at all scenarios. Sometimes I think the forecasting is a little conservative sometimes, and they don't share the worst case scenarios, but sometimes it's better to know what could happen. And I think history shows us we're seeing more of that happening to let people know, hey, this storm's showing this. But that's something to think about. If it's only 2 days out, it could blow up. And then these are real satellite images. I don't know if you remember Matthew, but that's a real satellite. Then last year with Milton, craziest thing ever. That is not Photoshop. Those are real satellite images. So something about the M storm. And then this is something I thought I'd throw in there, the last little slide. But this was last year. I shared this here. We're doing the same slide. The theme last year was don't be stubborn. That was what I was worried about. And, I put on there, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We had all these hurricanes, Irma, Charlie, Ian, all turned before our area. And the theme last year was, one of these times it's not going to turn. So this stat here, I always shared it, with Ian Oldsmar, uses water data to know how many people actually weren't home. And they still had 80% of their water usage during Ian. And we were told to evacuate. And I think we were just numb during Ian. So if anything taught us last year, I think people took Milton seriously and got the heck out of Dodge. So again, don't be stubborn. Every storm's different. You just got to be prepared. I think we've seen that. I think hopefully now there won't be that stubbornness of people not wanting to evacuate. Because back to that one stat, I didn't say enough, but we've had a lot of water deaths, and in my opinion, that's way too many in today's age of messaging. We shouldn't have anybody dying in a hurricane. And a lot of folks down there just thought, I can ride it out, man. I'm a Floridian, but we've learned no sometimes. So that's it for me. That's my plywood. I mean, it's went through 4 hurricanes. It's awesome to put up. I hate it, but a little memory, Irma ran out of letters. And then my favorite one is grab beer, run like hell. Good plan, right? Plenty of places around here to grab beer and run like hell. So anyway, but I'd love some, we're going to panel, so we're going to do questions up there. Cool. All right, well, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. We really appreciate you being here. And Mike is going to join us on the panel, and I'm going to introduce the other panel speakers, and I'd like them to take a seat up at the dais. And one little rule is to turn on your microphone when you are speaking. So joining us on the panel is Bill Pickram, our Director of Dunedin Solid Waste, and he can address questions regarding debris collection and obviously waste collection and recycling before and during storms. Rick Warner is a City of Dunedin arborist. He can address questions on trees in preparation for hurricane season and what to do if trees are down on your property. We have Michelle Monteclaro, who is our Environmental Program Manager for the Stormwater Program. She can address stormwater maintenance efforts, city stormwater preparation prior to hurricanes, and also the city's vulnerability assessment, which is currently underway. And there is a workshop on June 9th that I wanted to mention. Also, we've got Pinellas County Deputy Terrence Fallahy. He can talk about the importance of following the evacuation orders, barrier islands, and general safety during the storms. And Dunedin Fire Deputy Chief Michael Handoga will address safety preparations before and after evacuations, how water rescues were difficult during Helene and those evacuation zones. Nate Coco with State Farm Insurance will try to address questions on insurance. And Mike, of course, and Spencer Shaw from Pinellas County. So the questions are really up to you. I also have some prepared questions that I can tee up with our speakers. And we've got Natalie over here with a microphone that you just raise your hand and she will see you. So does someone want to start out, or I will be happy to do that? Any questions? All right, let me start out with, actually, I'm going to pick on Michelle. And I'm going to have Michelle, what steps have been taken to address storm and wastewater backups, and why did city wastewater pumps go out during Helene?
Hi, I'm Michelle Monteclaro. So I can speak to the stormwater maintenance side. When it comes to stormwater preventative maintenance, there are different methods that we use. We are constantly maintaining the stormwater system throughout the year, not just before hurricane season. So the methods that we use, we have a Vector truck, we go around the city, and we are literally vacuuming out the pipes. We bring the debris back to our yard. and then there it's tested, and we look for the volume that's removed. We also have our street sweeping efforts. That really looks at, cleaning the roads before anything goes into the storm drain. We are street sweeping throughout the year. And then we have 15 CDS units that capture debris before it enters the storm drain. On average, and I have some numbers here to share with you all, we're removing close to 400 tons of debris before it enters our stormwater system. And that's really important, right? We want our stormwater system to convey stormwater and, be able to take rainflow. In terms of prior to a hurricane, our stormwater maintenance staff, they're checking the ditch lines, they're doing inspections, they're checking catch basins, we're doing preventative maintenance, and they do prepare for sandbag preparation. Last year alone, we provided 5,000 sandbags, and we're really preparing in terms of response. So, our tools are ready to go. If we have to clear roads, we have response zones that are dedicated, and we fuel equipment and our generators. And we also wrap up any existing jobs or work orders that are out, so, we don't have any flying objects. It's very comprehensive, our stormwater program, and we are tracking all of the data that we can. It's a requirement of our stormwater permit that we do that, and yeah, it's a lot of work.
All right, thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Bill, one of the questions we get all the time in the communications department, and by the way, thank you, Spencer, for mentioning to follow the city social media and also subscribe to the Dunedin News. During storms, we publish a daily Dunedin News update to keep our residents informed on what is happening, and we follow and work alongside the county in the messaging and the evacuation orders and all the other things that you need to know about the storm. So one of the questions we get a lot is what to do with sandbags after a storm.
That's a good question, Sue, and we get that as well with the solid waste division. There's two different types of sandbags that you can, if a sandbag, if you did get hit with storm surge or it did its job and it did get inundated with flood waters, that bag in a sense is contaminated. You got to be if you're going to handle it, be very careful, wear gloves and a mask foremost. And then the way that to dispose of that is, right now is the best way to do it is to haul it to the county because they will accept it at the county plant. They have to handle it specially to where it's more environmental concern with how it gets landfilled or if it gets processed. If the bag did not get used for the storm and it's still clean sand, we suggest that you store it underneath from the sun and to keep it throughout the season. And then if after the season you're fortunate enough not to have to use it where it didn't get hit with water, is to spread that out for landscaping as well and dispose of the empty bag in your household as a household waste item.
Very good, thank you, appreciate that. Rick Warner, our city arborist, who has been with us for just about a year now, right?
Right.
Yes. Rick, the questions that we hear a lot from residents are, they're worried about their tree limbs coming down on their home during the storm, but they want to preserve the tree. How do they balance preparation for hurricane season without completely destroying their trees? And when should they begin to prepare for hurricane season?
I'll answer that last part first. So, the old adage is, when was the best time to do it? Yesterday, the next best time is today. So, if you haven't already taken time to assess your trees, now's the time to do it. And, I always say that there's no real magic bullet. The industry sort of gears people towards it's hurricane season. You're getting cards in your mailbox saying it's hurricane season, get ready, get ready. You really... it's like your tree's health and structural integrity is a lifelong sort of endeavor. You want to take care of your trees. You want to maintain them properly. I always advise try to get a company that you trust to do the work And once you find that company, stick with them. You know, a lot of mistakes people make is they just get these guys knocking on their doors, Johnny come lately, and they're paying money to damage your trees as opposed to make them safer. As far as limbs over the homes and that type of thing, it's kind of interesting to have an insurance guy here because I've been, a lot of times, people's natural inclination is they don't like low limbs. They think this limb's too low, and I need it gone. I say, well, why is a low limb the problem? A low limb's coming from a lower distance. It's less likely to cause damage. You look above and you see limbs above it. So human nature is to over-elevate the trees, which exposes your house more because you're leaving the limbs above it. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors involved, structural integrity of the limbs, the branch attachment, that type of thing. But you really need to start to think of lower structurally sound limbs as a protector as opposed to a threat. So once your trees become mature, frankly, the only real maintenance that you need once you understand the structural nature of your tree is to get out the major deadwood, the dying limbs, you know, keep those lower limbs that are structurally sound. You want to keep the foliage off your roof, you know, good 8 to 10 feet, maybe even 6 feet in some instances. But, you know, more often than not, you know, it's kind of mixed messages. You know, the hurricane stuff, yeah, every year is different. Past performance is not the same as future, you know, results. But a lot of times with trees, it's, you know, the odds are in your favor. If you've had that tree and it's been there a long time and it hasn't been a problem, not to say it can't be, but the odds are in your favor that that tree is not going to be a problem again. So just maintain them, stay on top of them, and get a company that you trust that's going to maintain them properly with a consistent approach. And you should only have to do them every couple of years once they've reached a mature age. And I'm sorry, this is something I want to emphasize. Don't ignore your young trees. Don't over prune your young trees because they're going to be big trees at some point. So take care of those and get an arborist that knows what they're doing, that prunes those properly, because most of the damage that we receive now is the result of decades of bad pruning, over pruning, that made these trees more dangerous than they inherently would have been otherwise. So people tell you live oaks are perfect, laurel oaks are garbage. If you ever hear that type of stuff, it's not true. They're all good trees. They've all been over pruned, just across the board. That's what's happened. People have been told there's a fallacy of the wind sail effect. If you ever hear any tree service tell you got to thin out the inside, let the wind blow through it, it's going to blow over, that's not the case. A more dense canopy is your friend. So all these trees that you see that you think were pruned properly over the years that are nothing but wood and little bursts of foliage out at the tips, that's wrong. That's not the way it should have been done. But generations of bad pruning have been passed down, and people think that's what they see, that's what they think it should be. It's not the way to do it. So crown density is your friend. I could speak for hours on this, and I probably spoke too long already, but it's important. So, yeah.
Thank you, Rick.
Yes, ma'am.
Really good information.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to direct this question to both Deputy Handoga and Deputy Falahy. I was actually in the OC during both Helene and Milton, and especially during Helene, and you've heard from both Mike and Spencer about the storm surge. And what conditions, and we can even reflect back onto Helene, what conditions were we emergency workers were able to do water rescues, and what conditions then prevented that?
So I'll speak from the fire department side, and we work under a county policy, and the county policy basically, and I have it right here, actually says that we can operate in sustained winds of 35 miles an hour. So once it gets up to about that over 35, starting to get into that 50, we'll start changing some of the apparatus that we send out. We're going to send out some heavier duty vehicles, the larger fire engines, the fire trucks. We won't be sending out some of the smaller ambulances. So once it hits between 50 and 75 miles an hour sustained winds, that's when the local incident commander and the local EOCs, so in Dunedin, it would be the fire chief, working with city staff, we make the decision between 50 and 75 miles an hour if we can safely go out and execute either wet rescues, water rescues, structure fires, medical calls. And during that time, we're closely monitoring the situation to see if things start getting worse. Once it hits 75 miles of sustained winds, it's an absolute no-go. There's no responses. All of our personnel have to basically hunker down, find safe haven, and unfortunately, they cannot respond because, number one, if we get our vehicles damaged, if we get injured after the storm passes and it's safe for us to go back out, we won't have the people or the resources to do that. So it ends up being just we hunker down and wait till it gets to a safe level.
And there were a lot of those calls that you had to hunker down
Yep,
during Helene, because we heard them coming in all night long. Yep. Deputy Falahy.
So from our perspective, we operate under very similar circumstances. Our equipment and our pre-storm, post-storm response equipment and vehicles are a little less wind impacted than the large fire apparatus. So we can stay out a little bit longer on the lower side of those wind numbers, but not much. And the same is true at 75 miles an hour. Unfortunately, we're not coming. So please take heed in the county's mandatory evacuations, because the reality of the situation is when it gets really, really bad, if you need help, help is going to have a hard time getting to you. So please heed those. And for those of you that came out today, I don't know if I've heard it yet, thank you for coming out, because getting this information and sharing it with your neighbors is really the most important part of the preparation. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. Nate, with State Farm, can you tell us what should people do to prepare before the storm? And then what do they do after the storm? Like, what are those initial steps that people should take when they come back home from evacuating and find their property has been flooded?
Sure. You know, disaster.pinellas.gov has a lot of great information. The Ready Pinellas app has a lot of great information. But specifically for insurance, you want to document the insides of your house, your personal property. That's usually a really good idea. Make sure your premiums are paid. Don't necessarily call for flood insurance when the spaghetti models start coming towards us, because usually there's a 30-day waiting period. So you want to do that 30 days prior. So it's better to do it 30 days ago than, if not 30 days, then do it today, right? But documenting your personal property is something that's often overlooked, and it's really hard to come up with a list of stuff that you have after the fact and after it's all blown away or flooded out. So document, document, document.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to open it up to any questions from the audience based on some of the questions we just gave them, or any follow-ups that you may have. There's one right here.
I could speak without the mic, I think. We got hit by pretty well with some water. So question was, is there any plan to move any of the power or utilities in Dunedin underground? You know, you don't have to prune trees if you have nothing above ground. Is there any plans to bring any of the utilities that are up, well, these underground? All right, I'll go to question number two.
Jorge, can you answer that, please?
All right, well,
Yeah, thank you. So hold that thought.
it took a while for a lot of the debris to be removed from households. So we hired a private hauler to move stuff out. Is there any plan to get that kind of debris removal quicker so it won't stink up a neighborhood?
I think we can speak to debris. Bill, would you like to do
Right.
that?
Yes, here's a response. It's a complicated, or it could be lengthy, but I'll try and keep it condensed. When you have a storm that creates an event and has the debris, such as flood surge, flooding, debris damage from that, as well as vegetation from wind events, it overwhelms your traditional garbage collections. All right, and it's a lengthy process, because where we take our everyday trash is Pinellas County Solid Waste to the landfill there. Landfill does not accept storm debris in this county, because there's an X amount of 80-year lifespan on the landfill, and they want to preserve that. That being said, we have to have we have pre-positioned contracts in position to bring in contractors who have the equipment and the means to be able to accept that, to collect the debris, the amount of volume that there is, and then to process that debris to take it to a Class 3 landfill. That right now, the debris that was accumulated from last year's two storms, Helene, and Milton, went to the Central Florida to a Class 3 landfill. So it's more involved to where we have to follow FEMA policy and guidelines, and our contractors who we have on board, we have two specific types of contractors, those who collect it and those who monitor it. The monitors are from the street to make sure that the debris is legitimate, that it was generated by the storm. From that point all the way throughout the process of it being put into a debris site, possibly locally in a town, and then to the final disposal site somewhere in Central Florida. So it's complicated. It's a drawn out process. It's not as quickly as people would like to see, but it's the format that we follow.
Can I add to that as well? Because we had to do a lot of communication around this. So keep in mind, we had 2 back-to-back storms. So as to what Bill was talking about, the contractors have to be approved by FEMA. We had FEMA-approved contractors. We had a FEMA or a FD, Florida Department of Environmental Protection site already approved as well, and that was Highlander Park. So the contractors had just begun to pick up the debris from Helene, and then they had to evacuate the state because of Milton. So it took them another week or so to come back to begin collection. And we wanted to have that, we had to have all of that collected within 90 days, which we were way ahead of it to get reimbursed by FEMA as well. So I know it felt long for all of us. But I think we did it really in pretty good time. But as Bill said, it is complex. But I think we've got someone from Duke here. Can you come up and answer the question? I'll have you come to the microphone. Sir, would you like to repeat your question?
Sure, sir. What's the plan in Dunedin to bring more of the utilities underground so we can withstand a future storm?
Oh, okay. Yeah, for the underground, we're constantly looking at options for power quality. When there's power quality issues in certain areas, we work with the city, and we're actually doing some undergrounding based on power quality in areas that have a lot of trees and vegetation that's growing into the overhead line. So we're doing the areas that are most needed for power quality issues. And in other communities, sometimes they're looking at, the beaches doing overhead to underground, and it's a costly initiative to go underground to do that. So some municipalities cover certain areas that are like a community redevelopment area. Some of the beaches, I know the good and bad of it. There's good. The underground is going to have a lot less exposure for the overhead winds, but it also on the beaches we've experienced the tides came in and washed out a lot of the new equipment, the pad mounts that we had on the beaches along the coast out there. So it's got the good and the bad, and the good is you don't have the exposure overhead. The bad is a tree falls over and the roots will pull it up, or someone digs into a new underground. But yeah, we're constantly looking at that. It's even new developments, and we give an option for a developer to put in an underground option. Our cost structure is overhead is the standard to put in overhead, and we charge the differential of the overhead to the underground costs, and we pass that along as an option as the upgrade to. So some developers go that route and to pay the extra, and some choose to go to do the overhead. So.
And with the Skinner project that's going on right now, the 2 roundabouts that are being installed, that whole area, right? We're putting in underground, or it's going to be underground. So, yeah.
Yep, and we've done some around the city hall here. We coordinated with the city a lot of different things, and on Douglas Avenue and your community development area. And you can on your home. I did it on my home too, where it goes from the pole to your home. You can do an underground conduit, and you can make it cheaper by putting the conduit in, and then Duke Energy can push the conductors through there, and it saves you some exposure from all the trees around your house. And when we're talking trees, we'll trim the trees house to house along between property lines, but we don't trim, on properties where the what we call the service drop goes to the property. So that's one place that a homeowner could do and lessen the exposure. So I don't know if that answers. If you had any other questions.
Okay.
Yes.
Get together and say, can you take it all down and we'll pick up some of the costs? So that's where I'd like to go. And my last question is for
Thank you,
law
thank you.
enforcement. They did a great job patrolling neighborhood. I was great to see their presence. But is there any way that you can get some of the tourist lookers out of the area while we're trying to get our areas cleaned up?
Wow.
Great question.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, one that we unfortunately dealt with this last half of September and all of October in many communities. You know, the mainland communities, that's a near impossibility, right? We do successfully do that for the most part on the Barrier Islands. As you may have seen, one of the boards that I have outside is the Barrier Island Reentry Program, where from Clearwater Beach, Mandalay, all the way south to St. Pete Beach and Tierra Verde, we limit the access to those Barrier Islands during and after storm surge situations. And the primary focus of that is to keep looky-loos away, right? Let the contractors do what they need to do, let the municipalities do what they need to do, keep looting to a minimum. And those are the primary reasons for that. Mainland side, we did during Milton, we shut down the county. We had barricades set up on at every northern entry point. Obviously, the Skyway was shut down for a long time, but to limit outside influences coming into the county. So we did what we could with that, but you know, people are curious. They want to get out there, you know. And the other side of that is that the areas that we can shut down, that we do shut down, even the residents want to go up and down their community, see what's going on. And that really does get in the way of the municipalities doing their cleanup work, the contractors getting in and doing what they need to do. And then the other side of that is we kept some, especially after Helene, we kept the Barrier Islands closed for what many people thought was too long a period of time, right? So the residents want to get back into their neighborhoods and see the damage to their properties. But there was so much sand along Gulf Boulevard that it was impassable, you know, for days. And then there were some smaller municipalities that have limited resources. It took them a little bit longer to clean up. So when we did open it back up, those municipalities suffered because now everybody's getting in the way of them cleaning up. So it's a double-edged sword. We do try to keep people out as best we can, but on the mainland side, that's a near impossibility.
Thank you. And any other questions from the audience here? No? Okay. I think we've heard a lot from Spencer and Mike, but Spencer, any last final comments? I know we talked a lot about evacuation. I think that's kind of the main message here is heed the warnings, be prepared, all of that. But any other final messages from you?
I'll conclude it with, as bad as it was this year, we improved in a lot of areas since Irma. It may not seem like it, but Irma was weeks and weeks without power, without dealing with debris, dealing with utility outages. The speed that we got it back from power, utility, getting debris cleared, we did better. I think a lot of citizens did better since Irma, but there's still a long way to go for government, non-governmental, and private residents.
All right, thank you. Mike? I know we, what do you think the biggest lesson we learned from last year?
Just don't be stubborn. I mean, it's serious. You know, I think a lot of us just didn't believe it could happen, you know, and I think I learned that from Ian, talking to folks down at Fort Myers. A lot of folks stayed, and I think if anything we learned is to take every storm serious and realize that, you know, we just be prepared. I mean, every storm's got its own unique set of impacts, and we've seen them all last year. So again, like I said, I think no matter where you live, you're going to see, you know, natural disasters. And good thing about hurricanes is, you know, they're coming. So there's really no reason to be shocked, you know. It's just part of living in paradise. And I guess the one thing I didn't show, which really means a lot to me, is neighbors helping neighbors. I had Fox called me during Ian, and I did this big, long interview, and the headline said, Mike talks about neighbors helping neighbors and how communities come together. And at the time, I thought, I wanted him to talk about my storm chase, and I was like, man, they didn't even talk about me in the eye of the hurricane. Since that moment, I learned so much, and how communities come together is so inspiring, and I think that's something, we probably saw here, and, people flock to areas. So I always tell people there's always going to be somebody there to help. It brings people together,
Yeah, that was one of the bright moments, I guess, or the lessons learned here is how humane and how kind and how neighborly everyone here was in Dunedin as well. I think we saw that all across the county. So, yeah, the best in people came out during the storm. So with that, if there's no more questions, oh, we've got one right here.
What I have called a building captain, and the idea of each block is a person that is handed by me a name and a phone number of a vulnerable person, a very elderly person living alone, and all he would have to do the day before or during or after is make a call and say, are you okay? Are you in panic? And even create possibly a miniature 911 in the community, where we also would have shelter potential, who could take an elderly person or a vulnerable person into their own home for that night or that day and calm her or him down. And also to know who has, for example, a generator in the community or a chainsaw, so that person can have, we can have ice, we can have cold water 50, 100 feet away from where you are. There are people with medicine that has to be refrigerated, and that can be provided. So, conclusion, the idea is the possibility with expanding on your comment to create a miniature 911 where you are, with names and
So in your
numbers and
community,
vulnerable
yeah.
people.
Yes, that's such a good point. We know that many people who were flooded and somewhat stranded were elderly by themselves. And we found that out after a lot of our staff went out door to door after Helene and Milton, which was really sad. So that is just such a wonderful thing that your HOA has put that together. That's a great message to send to the rest of Dunedin and the area as well. Thank you. Well, with that, we are at 20 of 12, and the expo continues for a little longer. I think there's a sandbag demonstration filling happening right now, and there are free sandbags if you would like to take home. We do want to remind you that sandbags are only really useful for up to 15 inches of water, not for the kind of storm surge that we had or the amount of rainfall that we had during Milton. And there are proper ways of installing your sandbags, and all of that information is on the county website and on our website as well. So thank you again for coming. Thank you so much to our speakers and our panelists and the chamber and everyone who participated. Thank you.